All right. Welcome, everyone. If you haven't attended an Enertiv webinar before, welcome. I keep these very short. We're going to try to get you in and out of here in 25 minutes. I'll stick around afterwards to answer any questions. But the goal is to teach you something and get you on with your day. To answer the basic questions, yes, the webinar will be recorded. Yes, you'll get the recording sent to you via email. Afterwards, it'll be directly from me. So if you have any follow-up questions, don't hesitate to ask. And with that, let's begin. So today's session is around choosing the right utility data strategy for your triple net portfolio, the pros and cons of each approach or each option. So just to set a little bit of context before we dive in, why do you need a utility data strategy for a triple net portfolio? Could be a number of reasons, whether it's building energy benchmarking laws. These are popping up in states and municipalities pretty much in every country. I don't know if anybody has seen not only the map of current laws, but the map of where laws are set to be passed, even though they haven't been passed yet. It's a lot of states and municipalities. Another reason is investor sustainability reporting requirements. Many LPs want to see their portfolios or capital partners report to GRESB, for example. Many want to see a specific score or rating in GRESB even. And even for those who don't have investor reporting requirements, are in jurisdictions that don't require it, many portfolios have set internal goals around sustainability, and in order to track the progress of those goals, you need to collect the data in the first place. So with that, what's the problem, right? In gross lease assets, this isn't really a problem. The landlord typically gets a utility bill for their property. They have all the data coverage they need. There's not really a question around having a utility data strategy. But collecting tenant-controlled utility data is really hard. Industrial, retail, multifamily, a lot of medical office and life science properties, tenants pay the bills. They control the data, and it makes it very hard for landlords to meet investor reporting requirements, benchmarking rules, etc. So there are 4 different approaches we're going to talk about today and go in depth into the pros and cons of each. Tenant utility bills, basically getting tenants to share their utility bills. Pretty straightforward. Utility direct, where you get the data for the whole building directly from the utility itself. Manual meter reads, where somebody physically on site reads the meter. Or shadow metering, where sensors are installed to capture this data in real time. So how are we going to judge these different approaches? On what dimensions does this matter? I'm proposing 2. One, what are the pros and cons of each approach from a data coverage perspective? So how effective is it at collecting tenant-controlled utility data? The second dimension, which I think often gets overlooked, is to what extent can this particular approach be useful beyond just reporting and benchmarking? So here's an example, right? Why is data coverage important? For GRESB, for those who submit to GRESB, data coverage itself is the largest source of points. And because the scoring system in GRESB is definite, meaning if you do certain things, you get a better score, while the rating system is relative to how you perform compared to your peers. And the distance between those ratings is actually pretty narrow. Focusing on just data coverage alone can be the difference between adding a star or 2, or even losing one, And that can be the difference between, acquiring or retaining an LP. But what does it look like on, what else can be done with this data? If you can take this data and turn it into insights that help optimize how the buildings run, obviously those dollar savings are going to flow to the tenants, but there are real points of value for the landlord too. I've seen specifically where a landlord was able to approach a tenant and say, hey, based off your data, you can save $80,000 a year. You could enroll in a program where the utility will pay you $41,000 a year. Oh, and by the way, we're going to rent out the roof and get some more rental revenue that way. And that tenant happened to be going into a renewal negotiation, and these were incredible talking points to get them to stay in the space. So these are the dimensions that we're going to be talking about. So let's dive into each of these approaches and the pros and cons of each. The first one I'm going to start with is utility direct connect. So the idea here is whether mandated because of the benchmarking rules or just because the utility has gotten so many requests to do so, some utilities offer the ability to get a whole building aggregate data from them directly. Now, the devil is in the details here, because if this was available everywhere and it was easy to do, nobody would have a problem at all. But let's dive in. First of all, if you're not familiar with this tool, Energy Star, for as long as it's around, actually, that reminds me, in the background, I'm going to launch a poll about Energy Star Portfolio Manager. I'll be interested to see the results here, but I'll continue as those come in. So Energy Star has a tool that tells you can type in your zip code and you can see if the utility offers the ability to get data directly. So what are the pros of this approach? First, it's cost effective. The utilities do this for free, and that actually is one of the downsides, the fact that they're doing this for free, and I'll explain that in a little bit. One of the other pros is that you are going to get whole building data coverage. So there's not going to be a scenario where the utility sends you half of any building's consumption. And then also, because it's coming directly from the utility, there's little to no processing required. You can, for the most part, and there should be some kind of like basic quality assurance, but for the most part, you can and kind of have to take the data at face value. There's not really a lot of extra work after the data comes in from a processing standpoint. So those are all positives of getting data directly from the utility. What are the downsides? What are the negatives? First, in buildings that have fewer than 3 to 5 tenants, and that varies depending on the specific utility, those tenants have to sign letters of authorization. And they have to sign these letters of authorization, and again, this varies too, but every 12 months, 24 months, maybe 36 months. So this is not a one and done process. This is basically an annual process to get tenants to sign letters of authorization. It's a negative, right? Having to get tenants to act on this can be very, very challenging. It can chafe relationships. It's also difficult to set up, and it's difficult to work with utilities. Just historically, utilities are monopolies. They are slow moving, and this is not their business, right? Like they have agreed to help, but they have no real incentive to do so on any timely basis. Kind of goes back to the fact that this is free. You're kind of getting what you pay for. There have been a lot of reports as well of accuracy issues. And the best way to understand this is from a utility's perspective. they think about their data in terms of meters. And so the concept of a building doesn't really exist in their database. If you think about it, like you tell them what the address is. So while they've kind of gotten better and some are obviously farther along than others, there have definitely been examples of people getting data from the building across the street or down the road or who knows from where. There's also timing issues potentially. So if you are submitting to GRESB, there's a reporting period. You have to get all your data in actually by the end of next week. There have been cases where utilities have taken so long that portfolios were not able to submit their data because they just didn't get it in time. The other thing to consider here is if you're looking at this from a portfolio perspective, the data is going to come in a wide variety of formats. Some utilities are going to just send a CSV file. Some will offer a API integration, API where you can tap into it. Some will push it directly to Energy Star, which is nice, unless Energy Star goes away. And others will be in XML files. There's just a huge variation. So while there's no processing needed of the data, it can be difficult to kind of wrangle all these different types of data across the portfolio. And then obviously, unless your portfolio is concentrated in these places that you see, there's likely to be gaps if this is your one strategy across the whole portfolio. Not all utilities offer this option. I know some portfolios and sustainability managers are holding out until everyone offers this, but it's been very slow going, and there's just very little incentive for them to move quicker. And then for each one of these, I'm going to cover the concept of trash, because as far as data coverage goes, that's probably the lowest of any utility type. So trash utilities are not, they don't really participate in these programs. So this is from like a data coverage standpoint for Utility Direct Connect. What about from a what else can you do? The truth is that the data you're going to get is useful for benchmarking and not much else. Because it's whole building data, you could use it to right size a solar deployment, but it's not really going to be granular or specific enough for you to unlock services or value for yourself or the tenants, besides helping a little bit with potential solar deployments. All right, so second approach, tenant utility bills. This can be accomplished in a number of ways. The most straightforward possible is property management sends an email saying, send us your utility bills. The tenant goes to their login, they hit download on each PDF, they plop it in an email, and they send it back to the property manager. Usually that property manager forwards it on to a sustainability consultant or something like that. A slightly more elegant way to do this with software is to have a tenant portal through which they can either add their utility login credentials, where the bills could be automatically gotten from their account, or they could, if they're not comfortable sharing their credentials, even in like a safe online portal, they could manually upload them, drag and drop into the portal. The nice thing here is that unlike the Utility Direct Connect, bills do have to be processed. So the software can do that processing. There's no manual step from property manager to consultant. But in either scenario, it's another cost-effective strategy, right? Even if you pay for software, it's going to be not very much. It's also straightforward, right? You don't have to work with the utilities to do so, you could start this today, right? You could just either adopt a software or email your tenants to get them to and ask for their utility data. There's also no limit in terms of which assets you could do this to, right? Utility Direct Connect is only eligible in certain utility jurisdictions. You could do this anywhere, and you can ask for trash, right? So all of those are pros. The cons here, similar to the LOAs, and probably to a greater extent, there's a lot of tenant involvement, right? Usually requests are made, requests are ignored, requests are made again. Some data is delivered. That data is, aggregated and processed. There's some realization that there's gaps. You go back to tenants. It's a lot of work for both property management and the tenants. Of course, the tenants are the customers, right? And they also have no real incentive to be doing this, especially if they're not getting any value out of it in the back end. Unlike Utility Direct Connect, where if you get data from a property, you're going to have the whole data for the property. It's entirely possible in a multi-tenant building to get data from some of the tenants and not others. So now you have not only potential data gaps across the portfolio, but also data gaps within a building, which can be really, really frustrating and challenging. And then there's the piece about processing the bills. This is where software can be really, really valuable, because if processing means that a human is manually transcribing the data from one place to another, there will almost always be typos and errors, and that will require more work down the line, and potentially like failed audits and all sorts of ramifications. So pros and cons of each approach. However, from a what else can we do with this data, the utility bills, unlike the kind of data dump that you get from a utility, the data bills themselves have a lot of valuable information that can be leveraged to help the tenants. So based off the bills, it could, if the location is in a utility jurisdiction that offers a demand response program, you could help them enroll in that. If it's in a deregulated market and you see that they're buying energy directly from the utility, there's an opportunity to do better energy procurement. And then also if one of the goals is to get the building certified, this data can be used in that process too. For Utility Direct Connect, in some cases it can, but if it comes as a CSV file, you just can't really give that to a professional engineer and say, certify my building. So important factors to consider when weighing the options is actually, there is value on the back end if you get the actual bills. Third approach, manual meter reads. So the idea here is, whether done in an app like on this page or on a clipboard, it's entirely possible for a human to walk up to a meter and write down the totalizer value and get that somehow into the kind of the database of record. So this approach is also cost effective, right? All you need is somebody's time and maybe a software to read the meters. It also, and this is really important, doesn't involve the tenants at all. So unlike the first two, where there's high levels of tenant involvement, manual meter reads can be done without their involvement, and I'll caveat for the most part. Also, if you put in a process here, you can have reliable data coverage. You can have whole building coverage across any asset in your portfolio. All it takes is a process to be in place. unlike, right, the first two, which require tenant involvement, and that could vary depending on the day. This is a lot more reliable. It's also straightforward, right? You don't have to deal with anybody. You don't have to deal with the utility. You don't have to deal with the tenant for the most part. It's very straightforward. And similarly to asking tenants, you can just get started, right? You could send property managers out tomorrow to read meters. Okay, what are the drawbacks here? One, you do need a physical presence and you need to spend man hours. So in industrial, for example, property managers oversee 20, 30, 40, 50 buildings at a time. That's usually okay, right? If they visit the site once a quarter, they do their manual meter reads then, but it's an important factor to consider. Accessibility of some meters. So this is really important, and it varies depending on the utility type. So this is a really popular solution for gas data because, as far as we've ever seen, 100% of gas meters are located on the outside of the building. And for whatever reason, gas utilities tend to be a little more challenging to deal with. So from that perspective, it's really reliable and a really great solution. When it comes to electricity, about estimated 80% of meters are on the outside of the building and not in tenant spaces. So can be a really good solution there too. But some meters will require accessing the tenant space. And then water is kind of all over the place. And it can vary dramatically by location and tenant infrastructure and a bunch of other factors. Another factor to consider, drawbacks for manual meter reads, is somebody has to process the meter reads. And when it comes to gas in particular, a lot of these meters do not have digital outputs. They are, 5 different dials, and you have to use some algorithm to figure out what the number is. If you're depending on a property manager to do that, they're busy. This is not their core competency, right? They should be delivering an amazing experience to tenants and staying on top of inspections and doing all that, making sure that renewals are in order. Reading meter dials and understanding what that means can be a downside. Here at Enertiv, we actually have started using AI to make it so that somebody could just take a picture of the meters and the AI will do the work of processing on the back end. Obviously with some automated QA checks and some human in the loop quality assurance, but something to consider if you're tackling this approach. And then obviously there's no meter for trash. So trash, not an option for manual meter reads. The other drawback of manual meter reads is the quality of data is lower than if you had a utility bill. There's not that kind of breadth of information that you can gather. It's closer to a utility direct connect, and there's honestly not that much that can be done to help the tenants with insights based off that data. Of course, you'll have whole building data, so you could right size a solar deployment, but that's about it. All right, let's see how we're doing on time. Okay, we're at 25 minutes. Thank you everyone for bearing with me. Shadow metering, final and fourth approach. So the idea here is that sensors are installed either on the electrical infrastructure, the plumbing infrastructure, or the gas infrastructure to capture tenant-controlled utility consumption. One of the side benefits here is that it's in real time. So it's not whenever meters are read. It's not once a month for utility bills. It's not a huge data dump once a year from the utility. It's real-time data. One of the other pros is that no tenant involvement is necessary here. So similar to manual meter reads, right? The installation of these sensors almost always happens on the outside of actual tenant spaces. And while many landlords give their tenants a heads up, usually the tenants don't have to be directly involved, and they definitely don't have to be directly involved on an ongoing basis. Also, once the data is QA'd and there's networking in place to get that data from the site to the cloud, there's no processing at all, right? There's a kind of direct link from meter to data warehouse or wherever it's going to live. You will get whole building data. There's no reason why half the tenants would be shadow metered and the other wouldn't if you didn't want it to be. And you can deploy this in pretty much any asset. There are some very, very rare outliers in which this is not possible, but generally speaking, this is available in any asset. And it's a straightforward process, right? Like once these are installed, you don't have to deal with anybody. You just get the data and it's available. What are the cons here? Obviously, you have to pay for hardware and networking, right? You have to pay for the sensors, for somebody to install the sensors, for there to be networking installed and for those connections to be made. And it's a longer deployment timeline. Unlike asking for bills and doing manual meter reads, which you could do tomorrow, there is a lead time here. You're not going to get the data tomorrow, even if you tried your best. And another note here, which I'll mention on my final thoughts, but there are important questions about permissibility and budgeting for this and passing down costs. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then obviously, trash is not an option. You can't shadow meter trash. The really great thing about shadow metering is that the full scope of insights are available to tenants. So in addition to bringing them energy services, whether that's demand response or energy procurement, getting the building certified with this reliable data, you can also approach the tenants with operational insights, whether that's helping them conserve how much energy they're consuming and therefore money that they're paying, or just shifting their energy consumption pattern to reduce peak load. These are really, really effective ways to provide value to the tenants in a way that aligns both with in many cases, their own net zero and sustainability goals, but also with internal goals, and as well as the shift of both regulations and reporting frameworks like GRESB, which are increasingly going from just benchmarking to actual performance. All right, so I promised 25 minutes, we're at 29. Final thoughts, and then I'll stay a few more minutes for questions. The big takeaway here is there's no silver bullet. There's no right answer. And it's totally okay, and we see it all the time, to deploy multiple approaches within a portfolio or even within any specific building. The other thing to keep in mind is account for the time and effort required to acquire and or process the data when you're considering costs, right? If at a very high level, choosing between free and paying for hardware, free seems like the obvious option. But if it involves chafing tenants and processing data and all these things, that might change the equation. So think about it. All right, so I kind of alluded to this one, but shadow metering specifically comes with questions about the hardware itself. What happens if we install this hardware and the hardware works, but something happens to the software provider, or we want to switch providers or whatever? Are we able to? Is their hardware proprietary or is it open? So there's questions to ask about that. What happens if this hardware breaks? What is the maintenance plan? How do we ensure that we have uptime so that it is a straightforward process and there aren't data gaps within a building? Is this permissible for our tenants? Like, is this legal? Are we allowed to do this? And can we pass these costs down to tenants? None of these are deal breaker questions. They've all been answered at scale, but they are important to ask and understand upfront. And then final thought. Many sustainability professionals, asset management teams are under pressure to get reporting right. And if you pursue that with a completely myopic framework, you're doing yourself a disservice, and it pays to keep an eye on what's next after benchmarking, because there's always a what's next after benchmarking. Benchmarking always lends itself, the point of benchmarking is to ask the question, how do we improve performance over time? So with that, really, thank you everybody for coming. I will stick around. Feel free to ask questions directly in the Zoom Q&A box. And otherwise, have a great day, and we'll see you on the next one.